Hey everybody, TacticAngel back on the PlayStation 5 to take a look at another premium ship in World of Warships Legends. This time we'll be looking at the Congress, a Tier 7 premium US Navy cruiser. For this review we'll start with some history, move into analysis, discuss commanders, run down the stats, and then finish off with some gameplay. If you want to skip around, please check out the time codes in the description. As for the history, you may look at this ship and think that this is a complete work of fiction, because who designs a ship with 7 guns? The US Navy. That's who. Even if the fact check on this ship is mostly false, which is clearly a measurable difference from other levels of not truth, obviously several designs were involved in the eventual construction of the Alaska-class supercruisers. Without going into the whole confusing and decidedly non-linear progression of designs that would lead to the Alaska, I will present you with this, the CA-2F design for a 24,000-ton cruiser with 7 12-inch guns. That's about as close to a real ship as we're going to get in this particular review. It was proposed in June 1940, alongside a handful of other configuration of 12-inch cruisers, in quotes, with a main battery of between 6 and 9 guns. That said, this isn't the CA-2F, and you can probably see that. Key differences are probably a better distribution of weight, with a triple turret at the rear. It would be both lower to the waterline, which would help in seakeeping, and would not place so much weight at the front of the ship, where there tends to be a lot of weight and not a whole lot of buoyancy. Also, the decision to move aviation facilities to the rear of this ship was essentially a safety measure known by this point to be generally a good idea. Simple reason is if a plane is stored, recovered, and launched from somewhere at the middle of the ship, that means you've got a lot of extra aviation fuel, known sometimes to be quite flammable, in kind of the worst place to have a fire, often severing communications, dividing your damage control parties, and also being inconveniently close to the power plant of the ship. It's also worth mentioning that the CA-2F design is a solid 5,000 tons lighter than the Alaska, so some of the other similarities between this ship and Alaska in game might be less striking had it actually been built. As far as Congress as a ship name, none of the Alaska-class cruisers were scheduled to be named Congress. At this point, the Alaska class were to be named after then territories of the United States, though there were a series of ships named Congress, the most impressive being a series of frigates. That said, the last USS Congress was a patrol craft. Some would say something of a downgrade, others might say it was more fitting. It's possible that it was both. In any case, there are plans to construct a Constellation-class guided missile frigate named USS Congress, and as far as I know, it has been ordered, but construction on the ship has not yet begun. As far as Alaska in game, she's hard to really describe. I could say that she's an Azuma for the US Navy, but she's not really anything like Azuma, aside from having big guns and no torpedoes. That said, she does fill the space of an American supercruiser, so she's probably as similar to Azuma in that regard as either ship is to their respective tech trees. It's not a useful observation, so let's just get down to her strengths and weaknesses. As far as what the Alaska is good at, she has a very usable armor profile, which can be angled well enough to protect it against battleship shells. Against cruisers, she's a bit more lucky, and can more or less bully any of them in terms of having good armor and punchy guns. And against destroyers, you have the option of taking both radar and sonar consumables, which gives you both decent awareness of incoming torpedoes, as well as a strong ability to detect any ship within 9.4 kilometers. Though, with the limited number of guns you have, this may be more of a support ability that you have for the rest of your team. Unlike Alaska, Congress is going to find it a bit more difficult to bow tank at her tier. Alaska enjoys the ability to bow tank almost any battleship that she'll face, really all but the 2 aiming optional battleships of the Yamato class. With just a 27mm bow on Congress, you won't face Yamato, you can still face Musashi, and there's more than a dozen other ships that can punch you directly in the face. So I have to worry much more about your range and angles. Whatever damage you take while tanking isn't going to come back quite as effectively either due to your less effective heal. And I'm sure I don't have to point out that the ship only has 7 guns, even if you skipped the history portion of this review. And that does mean sometimes she can be just a bit troll to use if you get a couple of bad rolls. Now, strengths and weaknesses aside, the easiest way to describe Congress is like an Alaska in a sea full of Yamatos. Essentially because the weak bow armor means you have to respect a lot more of those fully fledged battleships on the enemy team. In terms of maneuverability and flexibility, she does have most of that. And I guess it does make a certain amount of sense that with Alaska effectively being at tier 9, so an Alaska at tier 7 should probably have 7 guns, right? And that's Congress. That does make her a bit more dangerous to a few targets than other real cruisers at tier 7, though not many. As something of a battle cruiser or super cruiser, you're just supposed to be tougher than the other ships in the game, so what you are doing is trading out a little bit of that damage per minute for survivability, so it's going to be up to you whether or not you want to play that long game in a cruiser. When it comes to commanders, my sense is a lot of people are going to notice pretty quickly that this ship is going to be within 1 or 2 guns from a full-on Gneisenau effect, depending on your firing angle, so trying to secure hits is probably going to be top of mind. For that reason, I imagine Norman Scott will be very popular. His base trait will also tighten up those groupings as well, with the 4th lot skill fixated. You probably don't want to waste too many skills on starting fires, just because you don't get much in return for those skills with only 7 guns and a relatively long reload. You'll be far more well served if you focus on AP, so punching through is a good choice, making you even more dangerous to cruisers and actually making Congress capable of citadeling some battleships. The other cruiser commander, Kincaid, offers a whole lot of skills that basically allow the ship greater utility and survivability. There's a lot of stuff that falls into this basket: better turret rotation, better maneuverability, reduced damage to your ship and modules, and even improvements to sonar. All of these are potentially useful. The bad things about Kincaid are really when your guns don't want to cooperate, and with so few guns and with kind of unimpressive DPM already, that can be quite frustrating at times. If you wanted an experience like that, you might also actually be better off with Dewey. He's still going to struggle at the worst times to hit anything, but I know you can get the detectability of Congress down to as low as 9.5 kilometers. In spite of Kincaid's several sonar advantages, being able to sneak a light battleship almost into radar range is definitely a plus you can get with Dewey. It's far from a convincing build because extra fire chance, AA, and the mere modest bonuses that you get to speed and maneuverability are not exactly as sexy as a cruiser commander's abilities, though they're always going to be at least somewhat helpful. As we move into stats, expect to hear some stuff about other American cruisers, but always keep in mind that Congress is one of those battlecruiser-like ships that don't quite fit well into her class. Looking at survivability, Congress comes with 51,150 HP. Since this is hardly a cruiser, it's not surprising that this is very high for a cruiser and even competitive with the low side of Tier 7 battleships. With 16 to 330 millimeters of armor, you're also relatively well protected on paper. When we look at the armor model, we see some familiar Tier 7 cruiser characteristics, including, most importantly, a 27 millimeter bow. If you like to drive Hipper-class ships around like a maniac, you know this means that you can bow tank 15-inch battleships, but will get kind of disappointing results when trying to do the same thing against 16 or larger inch ships. All the green parts of this ship will take full damage from heavy cruisers and larger with HE, and regardless of shell type, anyone who's played Alaska kind of knows that the superstructure absorbs a lot of damage. Congress is no different there. Your 330mm belt protects the ship relatively well, and if they get through that, your citadel is below the waterline. That's the best that I can say for it. It's an interesting setup because at range, you can bounce things off of your belt and your deck, but sometimes you get unlucky and have a shell overmatch some 27mm of armor, then go straight through this pathetic 16mm citadel roof and drop right into your citadel, which is a bit troll. But it's also not amazingly common. Finishing this out with 13% on your torpedo protection, for a cruiser that's about 2.5% better than average. The main battery of Congress consists of 7 12-inch guns arranged in an improbable turret configuration that nets you 5 fore and 2 aft. These have a good 16-kilometer range and reload every 20 seconds. That's not very fast for a cruiser, but it compares favorably with the Zuma, though that ship does have 9 guns, or Siegfried, though that ship has 15-inch guns. Ultimately, no ship is a truly good comparison to this, other than to say that you fall somewhere in between those 2 battle cruisers I just mentioned and Baltimore, which is a better fire starter, has 50% more HE potential and about 25% more AP damage over time. The trade-offs here is that Congress can overmatch up to 21 millimeters of armor. That's not going to help with many destroyers, but there are more than a few targets out there that Congress can dunk on at any angle. Now, I've skipped some stats. Let's just say that the damage per shell is relatively high for a cruiser, but would be low for a battleship, as you would expect. Congress comes with a completely average secondary battery for an American cruiser. But the one other thing I'd want to point out here is that she does have relatively good firing angles, so even with a limited number of guns, she does seem to get more of them on target without doing something ill-advised. Defended by a 75 rating on her AA, Congress is decent at defending herself from air attack, but she lags about 45 damage per second behind Baltimore in terms of overall DPS. That's a bit surprising, and strangely it makes you the worst protected supercruiser right now, behind both Siegfried and the always surprising Azuma. You're probably not on the top of any carrier's list, but due to your size and sort of the C+ or B- protection, you're not a truly intimidating cruiser, and you are a bit easier to hit. If you want to try to outrun those attacks or maneuver against them, then you'll find the Congress offers you a few surprises. She has a totally average 33 knot speed. You'll find on almost all American ships, almost like they were all designed to be about the same speed, strangely about the same speed as they ought to be in order to keep up with fleet carriers. Weird. Congress is a big ship though, so she doesn't turn all that well for a cruiser, but if you have Alaska, this 850 meter turning circle and 13-second rudder shift should feel pretty familiar, since it's exactly the same. She does feel a bit more clumsy at tier 7 because there are so many more agile cruisers out there, but by no means is Congress a disaster at tier 7 considering her size and firepower. The size and firepower won't help much in the concealment department, though you might be a bit surprised that she isn't worse than she is. She's only about 200 meters more noticeable than most cruisers, which puts her naturally quite a bit below Soviet cruisers and even below most German cruisers. 7.9 from air is also 100 worse than average, but if you were hoping to fire from smoke, 12-inch guns aren't how you want to do that. 10 kilometers is very noticeable, behind only Siegfried as a cruiser. This should be better than most battleships, obviously. As we come to consumables, the Congress comes with a standard cruiser damage control, lasting 5 seconds and recharging every 60 seconds. Your choice in slot 2 is either sonar or defensive fire AA, and neither are really all that surprising. The sonar has 3.1 on torpedoes and 4.4 kilometer range on ships. Exactly what you'd find on Baltimore, along with the same reload and duration. Likewise, DFAA improves your AA per second for 40 seconds, reloading every 2.5 minutes, which is also pretty standard. Like other ships, I think the choice depends largely on whether or not you'll be playing with a carrier, because there's a decent chance that destroyer players will already want to keep their distance from you anyway. That's because your next slot has the choice between radar and a catapult fighter. I can imagine circumstances where a catapult fighter makes more sense, but it's nothing special, and that's few and far between. I hardly think anyone is going to waste their time with it. The radar, on the other hand, is not just useful, it's super useful. Now, it's not quite the Alaska's 9.5 kilometer radar, and I fully believe this is to annoy Papa Nicholas in trying to figure out how to slot this into his infographics, but 9.4 kilometers still is super good for an American radar, and it's long lasting, 35 seconds for you, 30 seconds for everyone else. Since you have kind of a long reload, a limited number of guns, and are probably going to miss, you'll want to try to use this in concert with some other team member, or multiple if you're lucky, but nevertheless it's very useful just to have in the back pocket. After that, Congress picks up just 2 heals, their normal 0.5% per tick rather than the improved heals on Alaska, but you've already got a lot of HP, relatively speaking. It's nothing really to write home about, but if you're used to Alaska, it may feel a little bit underwhelming. Alright, with that out of the way, we're going to jump into some gameplay. Going to be on Hotspot. You can see here I'm already looking at the map to see what in the world's on the enemy team. I usually do that before the game starts. If I'm wise, I remember to do that after the game starts if I'm trying to review a ship. Doesn't always happen. It doesn't always happen. So anyway, we are on the east side of this map. We're going to roll out even further towards the east just because we've got pretty good speed. We're going to put our commander up on the screen so you can see we're working here with some accuracy. We're working here with a little bit of range, some pen. We want all the things to happen on this particular ship, so we're using Norman Scott. Not a lot of surprises here. It's pretty normal stuff. We take a second look at the map. We're actually kind of seeing if there are any divisions on the enemy team. Among the ships we've already spotted, and there are none at all. So, okay, who knows what's over here? Looks like we've got Colorado going around, Suzuya going into the middle though, and we have a couple extra ships that are moving from the middle towards us. Now there are a lot of islands between me and anything that can shoot at me, so I'm kind of thinking, what are my chances in terms of getting totally wrecked by the folks who are coming over towards me from B? Or I guess it's from A. So now we see Suzuya. Suzuya is nosing in. We go ahead, put some shells out on it, just to let it know that we're here. He's going to start to turn in. You can see we've got mostly a little bit of cover from the other islands. Doesn't look like that's stopping people from shooting at me. But I've done more or less what I wanted to do here. I'm lucky a little bit that those guys are shooting HE because, well, I mean, easiest way to say it is this could be more painful if they weren't. I'd say on average that's an extra 10,000 damage. Just guessing. Just guessing. Now we see Colorado is shooting at us. We spotted... Well, we didn't really spot him. Somebody else spotted him early in the game. We put a couple shells out on him. We switch immediately over to HE because we're not going to be able to reliably penetrate anything on the front of his ship with just 12-inch guns. Hopefully we'll get a spot on him either from the destroyer that's inside B, or somebody else's plane gives us a little bit of love. Obviously, we don't have a plane. We're playing with sonar. We're playing with radar. This is the way the ship comes to you in a box, and I would highly suggest not changing that unless you have a really good reason to. I decide at this point, looking at the circling of that plane, to move forward. There are two options essentially that I see. One was he was going in, which would give me the broadside of his ship, and the other is he's going to have to face me going out, which is a little bit less favorable, but I am a considerably faster ship than he is. We get a couple fires there, which is nice. We're gonna angle Most of those shells that probably did a lot of damage to us went in either on a lucky bounce chance or in the upper belt. So, you know, we took a pretty good amount of damage. At this point, I'm counting on my speed to do me a lot of favors here. We're already up to 33 knots. We lose a little bit there in the turn. I don't really like my chances here because he actually looks like he's coming at me pretty quickly. I'm a little bit worried, but it looks like he is having trouble tracking me with the speed of his turrets. As we get around, we're aiming in through the bow. We managed to catch the Citadel with one of our shots. You can probably do a little bit better in terms of actual shot damage. Kind of at range. You don't... When I was talking earlier about being able to Citadel battleships, you don't need to be at these sorts of ranges. What I'm trying to play against is actually the relatively unprotected nature of my Citadel. And my Citadel, your Citadel, if you choose to get this ship, is beneath the waterline. So that's actually its best protection. The 330 millimeters of armor at the ranges that we were just playing at is not going to do you a whole lot of good. Now we've gotten ourselves into a position where we can basically just support our team, right? Because Richelieu can't see me right now. Okay, so as soon as I say that, he can't see me. That's fine. But he's not aiming his guns at me, and you can see if we get the side of a battleship that's not paying attention to us, we can do a pretty decent chunk of damage. I think in that case we landed, 13,000 damage, more or less, against the Richelieu. And obviously he wasn't able to respond with anything because he's got a lot of other problems to think about. In that case, we land, quite a bit less. We're spotted now. He's still not going to shoot us because there's just no way that you're going to think I'm going to get my guns around and try to kill that Congress. We don't quite get him. So we leave him on a sliver. We decide we're going to go ahead and move on to whatever's next. Somebody else obviously is going to finish him off, and we're right about that. You can almost see the turning ability of the Congress here, but not quite. We bump an island. It's actually the easier way to turn. So we back up a little bit, reverse our rudder, throw it over in the other direction, and we're going to be able to get around this pretty easily. Now, overall, what I'm thinking here is like a person who plays too many destroyers. I want to just rush over towards A. That's actually not going to happen. We're going to speed this up towards the end of the game. My hope, just kind of like charging towards B to try to contest that, was if I get into a position where I get spotted and I don't actually get spotted, I can use my radar to maybe force the situation. It can be useful at the beginning of the game. I don't know that we had the firepower to really do it in this particular case, but it is always scary as hell from the enemy team's perspective. So in any case, we're sailing towards A. We end up getting asked to try to defend other areas, and we think maybe we should go over there just to see if we can use our radar. It doesn't really happen, and we end up winning the game. So there you go. Closing thoughts on Congress. Well, let's just say I think this ship is about as good as it reasonably can be at tier 7. I've never said anything other than Alaska is a phenomenal ship at her tier, arguably one of the best ships in the entire game, simply because she is so versatile. I wouldn't say the same thing about Congress at tier 7, but she feels a lot like her big sister, and if you're a master at the legendary ship, this one will probably not be bad for you to make money, as opposed to, anything at legendary tier. Just be prepared to be trolled from time to time by her guns, by her armor, and that's really all I have to say about Congress, except maybe that it's not too late to write to your senator and suggest that they name this ship after maybe quite literally almost anything else. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments though. Hope you've enjoyed the video, and as always, I'll see you on the next one.